Hello and welcome to Scale Stuff. In this week's video I'm going to be building and reviewing the Airfix Vintage Classics Universal Carrier and 6-pounder gun in 1/76 scale. As small as this universal carrier is going to be, these little tank kits were a very important part of the British war effort, serving as battle taxis and general dogs bodies to the British Army, so I had to get this set to complete the convoy in the cabinet. In the box you get a black and white instruction sheet, a very small bag of parts to make the universal carrier and 6-pounder gun, and a sheet of decals to mark up a tankette that served with the 51st Highlanders around D-Day. The paint and decal guide for this model is printed on the back of the box. A first quick look at the sprues show that this kit's going to need a fair bit of cleanup. Ejection pin marks, flash and numbers can be found on what looks like most of the parts. The flash on this kit is on the heavy side for a vintage classic. I'm not sure what it is with smaller parts, but they always seem to need more cleanup. Being a vintage classic, this kit dates back to a tooling from 1966, and it shows its age. The detail on the figures is okay though, at least compared to some of the other figures from this time. Anyway, there's only so much you can tell about a kit from the sprues, so now let's get on with the build. First thing on the menu is the main base for the carrier. Before I can start on this, I'm going to need to do some cleanup. Here I'm sanding off all the ejection pin marks on the bits, as this model is open topped, so I want the parts to be as clean as possible. The marks are pretty deep though, and there's a limit on how much I'm willing to sand, as I think I'll just destroy the parts. After cleaning up the ejection pin marks as good as I can, I sand off the attachment nubs and trim off any flash I find. I'm going to do this before each upcoming step, but from here on out this will be off screen. This kit looks like cleanup will take longer than the build. Not that I'm complaining, it's just part of the process. Now it's time to start building the base. The parts go on easy, but the fit's not amazing. The worst bit is the front of the carrier, but it is what it is. Here it will pay to keep an eye on the side pieces so you don't get them mixed up. With the main base done, it's time to add more details. The light's a tricky bit to add, and it would help to have some tweezers here. Then it's on to adding a few panels and boxes. Again, these bits need a little light persuasion, but they go on okay in the end. Now the instructions want me to add the one-piece tracks. I'm going to leave these off though, so they're easier to paint later on. I'm not too impressed with the detail on these though, as the tracks look pretty slick. Next, it's just a case of adding the front fenders and steps to the carrier. Lastly, the kit has you add the rear panel and tow hitch. With those bits on, that's the minuscule carrier complete. Now we're on to making the gun. Firstly, starting on the main gun assembly. The gun's a bit fiddly to make, but it's pretty simple to construct. Gun complete, it's time to add it to the base. Again, this bit's a bit fiddly to make, but no major drama. While building this, the instructions want you to not glue a few of the parts together, but the fit's a bit wobbly and rickety, so I'm going to glue the gun to the base with the gun in its deployed state. This bit will benefit from a good bit of drying time, as being quite fine, it's a little bit delicate, and there are lots of angles that would be easy to knock out of alignment. Now I'm adding the shield to the gun. This is again quite delicate and fiddly to add, but does go on okay in the end. Like with the previous step, I'm going to leave this bit to dry for a good while before I risk picking the thing up again. With the gun dry, all there is to do now is add the wheels. Gun done, I'm also gluing some of the figures to bases. I'm doing a sloppy job of this because the gun's going to be on a proper base later, so these bits are going to be cut off once I'm done painting the figures. With all those bits together though, that's the build stage of this model complete. Now it's onto the painting. For the base coat I'm using Humbrol 155 Olive Drab. As always, I'm spraying this up, off screen and outside to avoid fumigating myself. Base coat down, first thing I'm painting is the black. For this I'm using Vallejo Matte Black. The tracks are all one piece, but as there's not much detail to get around, painting them's a doddle. While I've got the black paint out, I'm also painting the rubber wheels on the gun and a few other little details that I will get off screen. Next it's on to sorting out all the material on the model. For this I'm using Tamiya XF's 49 Khaki as the base coat. I'm also painting the figures using this as a base coat. Now the tracks are dry, I'm giving them a light dry brush with Army Painter Plate Mail. Doing this really highlights that the detail on these tracks has been nuked over the years running this tool. There's only the ghost of a suggestion of track links left on them, which is a bit of a shame. With the tracks in a basic state, I'm adding them to the carrier. The tracks are actually pretty tricky to add, even though they should be quite simple. Turned out that the holes to take the tracks hadn't cast properly and they needed enlarging to get a proper fit. Anyway, with the model in a basic state, it's time for its first wash. For this, I'm using watered down matte black. The model really needed this coat. The wash is really picking out all the details. Unfortunately, it's also picking out what's left of the ejection pin marks. Despite its small size, because it's open topped, there's a lot to get the brush into on this model. With the wash dry, I'm adding the decals. The decals in this kit had that same old issue as some of the vintage classics. They have far too much carrier film. I'm trimming this off before applying the decals, as otherwise a lot of the decals would not fit. The decals also seem a little bit overscaled for what they go onto. Either way though, the decals brighten up this model and give it some much needed interest. Decals dry, now it's time to dry brush the dust coats. Firstly, I'm going for the tried and tested Army Painter Skeleton Bone. This will muck up the tank and highlight all the raised areas. Then I add a lighter dry brush of Army Painter Elf Green to simulate wear and fading on the base coat. I've tried doing this dry brush before the skeleton bone in the past, but find it works better over a lighter undercoat. Next, I'm getting out the BS Dark Earth to give the tankette a light dirt coat. I'm getting into all the hard to reach places with a brush to add this initially, then using a light sponge dab to give the effect a bit more interest. With that on though, that's the tankette done. Now all I need to do is make a base for the gun. For this I'm using the top of a peanut butter jar. Firstly, using a very sharp knife, I'm cutting off just the thin top bit of the jar lid. With that off and the edge sanded down, I then give it a coat of Humbrol 155 olive drab. Then using some PVA glue, I add some dyed sawdust as flock. I like the old school flock look for these models. I don't know why, it just seems to go with the era they were made in. Finally, I add the gun and figures to the base, along with a few offcuts of some prefab brush stuff I got ages ago. I think a small base is the way to go when guns come with a crew. I haven't got the room for a full-scale diorama in my cabinet, but these small bases tie everything together and make moving the gun and crew easier as they're all one unit. Anyway, with that, that's the model done. This is the finished model. Despite its flaws, it's actually turned out quite reasonable. In conclusion, the Airfix 176 scale universal carrier and 6-pounder gun is an okay model kit. Certainly dated by modern standards, this shows on the figures and tracks in this kit the most. I found some stages of the build quite fiddly, mainly due to the Bren carrier's small size. The ejection pin marks on this kit were some of the deepest I've seen on a model. In hindsight, I should have filled them before sanding them, but you know, you live and learn. The decals also had far too much carrier film. This seems to be a problem with a lot of the new box versions of vintage classic models. This is easily fixed though by cutting them off the carrier film with a sharp knife. The decals are nice and bright though, and you do get a fair few of them in this kit, which really helps as this model needed the extra detail on it. Having said all that though, this kit, though dated, does build into a nice representation of a universal carrier and 6-pounder gun. It just needs a little work to get it there. And for the low price of £6 brand new, I don't think there's too much cause to grumble as it's very affordable. And most of the issues with this kit are fairly simple fixes. I would say though as a final note that this kit isn't really suited for a beginner unless you're after a cheap kit for practice, as mistakes won't break the bank, or it's more of an intermediate modeler who knows the ropes and won't get stressed at the cleanup that this kit asks you to do. Anyway, that's my build and review of the Airfix Vintage Classics 176 scale universal carrier and 6-pounder gun. As always, thank you for watching. I hope you found the video helpful if you're building or thinking of buying one of these kits at home. If you made it this far, please consider subscribing, as it really helps the channel out. Until next time though, look after yourselves and have a good one. Goodbye.